Matty Fresh on the track up at State. And I'm bringing to you live my boys Alec and Nate. Tequila Ty, Jay, Nelly, and Zillin in the building. So kick it back, pour the drink. We chillin' because I'm boozing and betting and ballin' like I'm 2-6. In the blue kicks, watch me move quick. Yeah, this the blueprint. So who's getting involved? Welcome into the show. This is Booze, Bets, and Ball, baby.
And welcome back to Booze, Bets, and Ball, a Penn State football podcast brought to you by Big Banter. Penn State coming off a 41-13 win over Northwestern, a game in which they trailed 10-3 at some point in the first half. Meltdown galore everywhere. Penn State is on bye this week, so I gave the squad the week off. Made a call to the bullpen to bring in the Big Banter CEO himself, Brant Henson. Good to see you, Brant.
Yeah, good to see you too, Alec. Thanks for having me on. This is my Booze, Bets, and Ball debut, so super happy to be here.
Yeah, I thought it was a good week to bring him on while we had not too much to talk about. I know Nate's been traveling and Justin was working on some school stuff, so timing worked out. So really excited to get into this. I wanted to start by having an outsider perspective on Drew Aller because it's been, I guess, mixed reviews so far from the Penn State fan base. He came out against Northwestern, looked like, Justin Herbert, something along those lines, a guy who's just going to sling it all over the place. And then the kind of weeks after that, some struggles, low completion percentages against Illinois, and then this past week against Northwestern. He was 48% against Illinois, and then I think around 55-ish this week. So not crazy numbers. The yards per attempt is also pretty low. I know that's kind of been the big thing, that Penn State has not gone downfield that much. That was kind of the one thing a lot of Penn State fans expected coming into the season, was that Sean Clifford struggled to throw the ball downfield and that Aller would kind of be the opposite of that. So what have you seen so far from the sophomore?
Yeah, so I'm bringing an outside perspective here. I'm an Ohio State fan, but I've watched a lot of Penn State this year. I've watched bits and pieces of every game. And Aller, going into the season, he was really the biggest question mark to me on this Penn State roster. I felt like it was a pretty sound team on the offensive line, the running backs, some solid receivers, and then every level of the defense just has at least one or two studs. So I thought this was a really complete roster, and Drew Aller was kind of the question mark. I didn't think that he needed to even be great for this team to have a lot of success. And so far, he's kind of met my expectations. I know a lot of people were pretty high on him going into the season and thought he would just kind of go out there and sling it and just be a stud. But the reality is this is a guy who's now only made 4 or 5 career starts.
5, yeah.
Yeah, 5 career starts. So he's still very, very young. He was a true freshman last year. And yeah, he has looked a little more on the timid side and has kind of not really slung it down the field like he did in that first game.
Yeah, so I got a tweet here. Lowest average depth of throw of Power 5 quarterbacks. Aller is first at 6.3, followed very closely by Bo Nix at 6.4. Those were not, going into the season, those were not the two guys I expected to kind of be at the top of that list. But, you brought up Aller kind of maybe on the timid side. I think part of that comes from he saw Sean Clifford make some wild throws last year, and he saw, or I guess heard is a better way to put it, kind of the crowd cheer for Aller every time Clifford made a bad throw or an interception. And I'm wondering if that's playing with his psyche. Like, I don't want that to happen to me. Like, I don't want them to hate me kind of the way they hated him. And I don't know if that's it, but it kind of seems like he's trying too much to not do anything bad because he's worried about the consequences. Obviously, when you turn the ball over, it's not a good thing, but he might be overthinking it a little bit.
Yeah, I do think it's a little bit of that, especially just a guy who's only made a handful of career starts.
Yeah,
it takes a lot to kind of gain that confidence to be able to throw the ball down the field, and he's shown he's capable of doing it, but he just hasn't really taken that step in the most recent weeks and in those Big Ten matchups, especially.
Yeah, I kind of look at it the Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers thing. I don't think it was much of a coincidence that Brett Favre was notoriously one of the worst turnover quarterbacks of all time, and then Aaron Rodgers is like the number one in terms of touchdown interception ratio. I think it's seeing what the guy in front of you did and trying not to mimic that because you saw the bad consequences that could come out of it.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a little bit of that conservatism. It'll be interesting to see though if he starts taking some shots on the field in the coming weeks, because I know I was over on the Big Ten huddle this past Sunday, and one of the big talking points was Drew Aller, and we were talking a lot about how conservative he has been throughout the past few weeks. However, he's going to have to make some big throws in those coming games against Ohio State and Michigan in order to keep the team in the game. So it's going to be interesting to see, that should he probably take some shots on the field before those games to kind of feel the situation out. I would say, yeah, but it's interesting to see how conservative he's been so far.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we're gonna move on here a little bit, talk about the Big Ten as a whole, which we don't get to do often throughout the weeks because we're busy, going over the week's prior game, and then we bring on the Big Banter crossover pod and just talk about the game. So we don't get a lot of time to talk about Big Ten as a whole, but we're at the somewhat halfway point, a little less than halfway here in the season. Some teams will be on their sixth game this season, Michigan and Maryland being those two. Rutgers too, actually. But what has surprised you in a good way and a bad way? Let's start with the East so far with the Big Ten East.
Yeah, starting in the East, I think going into the season, like before the whole Mel Tucker thing, I'd say just how bad Michigan State has been. I know they didn't have a great year last year, but they were expected to, not be as bad as they have been. Then with the whole Mel Tucker thing, like you lose your leader, you kind of lose the locker room, and it all goes downhill. So I guess that hasn't been as much of a surprise as it would have been maybe looking at these standings preseason. I guess it's really hard to not choose Rutgers as your biggest surprise season in the East. Sitting at 4-1, they've had some pretty dominant wins. Ran the non-conference slate, which was really interesting to see out of them. They look like a honestly pretty competent football team. It'll be cool to see how they did have that loss to Michigan, but it'll be cool to see how they stack up against maybe like a Maryland or Michigan State or IU. Can they finish fourth in the East?
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of people would point to Maryland. To me, Maryland should have won those 5 games. I just think that out-of-conference slate was not strong, and then they obviously played a reeling Michigan State team right on the heels of Mel Tucker officially being fired, and then they play Indiana obviously struggling. So I think I'm really interested to see this Maryland-Ohio State game because I think it'll tell me more about Maryland than Ohio State in a way. If that game's close, I think we start looking at Maryland being 5-0 as real. I don't think it means Ohio State's bad. Or struggling. I wouldn't go as far as say bad, but not what we're accustomed to. I think it would say more about Maryland actually.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Maryland's schedule so far, and the toughest opponent they played is right there near the bottom of the Big Ten East. That 2-3 IU team is probably the toughest opponent they've had on their schedule so far. So it's tough to say that 5-0 is real, like you mentioned, unless they can play OSU close. So being an Ohio State fan, that's one I'm really intrigued for this weekend coming up in Columbus. I'm going to need to hit up Tequila Ty and see what his drink of the week is.
Yeah, I'll ask him. We'll get one going with him. He got one last week. I was gonna say I couldn't remember if we had one last week, but I think it was the Bloody Mary mix he had last week. Yeah, because Ohio State is obviously Penn State's next big game. They have UMass next week. They're on bye this week, but it goes Ohio State, Indiana, Maryland. So obviously watching the Ohio State Maryland game is going to be very telling for Penn State in terms of what they have ahead for them. All right, the West here, probably as funny as it gets. I realized, there's Northwestern. I thought they got cut off here. Northwestern being as high on this list as they are is, I think, a pleasant surprise. We saw Illinois too. I don't know what to make out of this. We saw Iowa. Penn State's already seen 3 Big Ten West teams, so we've seen half this division already, but it is just another cluster.
Yeah, Northwestern is definitely the one that stands out to me. I didn't think there was even a chance they would rattle off any Big Ten wins this year with kind of the state their programs in, and what we saw from them last year, and then losing their head coach with all the offseason turmoil. So just for them to go rattle off that win against Minnesota in overtime was definitely impressive. I'd say they're probably the most impressive surprise on this list. And as far as the most bad surprise, I mean, the division as a whole, I thought we'd maybe see a little bit better play out of the teams in the division this year, just with Luke Fickell bringing in a lot of new guys to Wisconsin. With Iowa having Cade McNamara, I thought maybe their offense would maybe just get a little more humming than it was last year. But so far, that has proven to not be true. Minnesota, they're always an interesting team. You never know if they're going to have some big offensive plays, be good on the defense. That they look kind of sound throughout the first few weeks on defense, so that's kind of crumbled a bit down the stretch. Then Purdue, they definitely lost a lot. I mean, coming into the season, just massive turnover with the head coach, the quarterback, and losing their number 1, number 2, and I think number 3 receivers as well.
Yeah.
Definitely lost a lot. So they were a big question mark. They lost a lot of games early on, but that one against Illinois last week was definitely a good momentum builder for them. And then Illinois and Nebraska sitting at the bottom honestly surprises me a bit. I thought Nebraska would be a bit more competent under Matt Rule than they were under Scott Frost, but it looks like the same old Nebraska so far through 5 games. And Illinois was a team that I thought would kind of run the trenches on both sides of the ball, and their offensive line has not lived up to what I thought it would be preseason.
Yeah, Illinois, I think we, going into that game, expected Luke Altmaier to give a little more, and he ended up with 4 interceptions. So that kind of shocked us, because we were actually intrigued to see how Penn State was going to do against him, because he had looked pretty good through the first couple games. So that was a shocker. Between Luke Lachey and Cade McNamara's injuries, does Wisconsin have any excuse to not be the representative in the Big Ten title game for the West at this point?
Not at all. I mean, they play Iowa at home too. I think it's a night game in Madison. Like, just the environment, and with how just awful Iowa's offense has looked this season, there's no way Wisconsin should be losing that game. And they're just kind of head and shoulders above the rest of the division at this point. It'd be really shocking if they didn't come out on top.
Yeah, for sure. There we go. All right. So I will say, we talked about that we think Wisconsin is probably going to represent the West. If you had a guess out of these 3 teams, and I guess I'll put Maryland kind of in the mix for now.
We can take them out.
Yeah, you're taking them out? All right. So we'll take them out. I wanted to be a little nice. I know the Turtle guys on the Slack like to get it going. So
yeah, they've got a little bit of confidence in their team, but the Buckeyes stick it to them this week.
I mean, it's for me, it's hard to gauge which of the 3 look like the favorite. They all looked a little shaky at the beginning of the season offensively. Obviously, Ohio State goes into Notre Dame, gets that really gutsy win. Michigan dominates on the road against Nebraska, and Penn State, despite some of the offensive problems, the first team defense has given up, I think, 4 touchdowns through 5 games. So all of them have things going for them, and at the same time haven't, in my opinion, none of them have hit their stride yet. I just don't know what you think in terms of a favorite, because I don't think anyone knows at this point. When every time I look at it, it looks like each of the 3 has like a 30% chance to make the game.
No, that's exactly where I put it right now too. Just 33, right down the middle. The only team that's really had a test so far is Ohio State. They went on the road and pulled out that big win against Notre Dame, which was awesome. But ultimately, that one doesn't help in the long run in the Big Ten standings. The ones they're going to need to win are, this weekend against Maryland, if you want to count that, and then Penn State and Michigan. Those are the 2 that really matter. And then both of those teams really haven't had a test yet. So it's really tough to say. All 3 of those teams look like probably top 5, maybe top 7 teams in the nation. It's definitely going to be a lot of fun, because I know they all have like 1 home game, 1 road game against each other. So if they split those all 1-1 or split them all 1-1. That's going to be a really interesting scenario to see what happens. Not only in to see who represents the Big Ten East in the championship, but also with the playoffs.
Yeah, the playoff thing will be interesting. We're going to talk about the Pac-12 in a second here because they will play a role in that. Northwestern coming back to beat Minnesota last week was actually pretty big because both Ohio State and Michigan play Minnesota this year, and Penn State is the only one that plays Northwestern. So the whole win percentage tiebreaker thing, that was actually a pretty big outcome for Penn State there.
Yeah, that is big time because Minnesota just, I kind of scratched them out of the Big Ten West race just before the season even started solely because of that schedule.
Yeah.
So yeah, that win is just going to be huge in that tiebreaker if that's a situation that ends up unfolding.
Yeah, the thing is, Penn State and Michigan pretty much play 2-game seasons this year. It comes down to playing Ohio State and then each other. Whereas Ohio State went to Notre Dame, they have to go to Wisconsin. They're pretty much in a 4-game series. So Ohio State has a little more of an uphill climb, a little more battle to go through. But that could honestly play into their advantage, just being a little more tested than Penn State, especially Michigan, because Michigan plays pretty much nobody through 9 weeks, and then it's Penn State round Ohio State in a row.
Yeah, that's the thing that when you look at Michigan's schedule, like they're not going to be battle tested whatsoever going into that Penn State game. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that team kind of stacks up there. But yeah, going into the season with Ohio State having the schedule they have, just had me really excited for Buckeye football in a way that I haven't been in previous seasons, just because there were so many question marks coming into the season with the quarterback being probably the biggest one, but also just the tough schedule going on the road to Notre Dame, on the road to Wisconsin, and on the road to Michigan. That's a really, really tough schedule. And to see what they have done so far with that win over Notre Dame, I'm definitely I'm very happy with that outcome. I'm super excited to see what unfolds going forward.
For sure. So as we just talked about, the Big Ten technically has 3 top 10 teams right now, but if you want to stretch it out, they actually have 6. The Pac-12 teams, USC, Oregon, Washington. USC's ranked 9, Oregon is ranked 8th, Washington's ranked 7th. The 3 of them, along with UCLA, who is 3-1. Yeah, 3-1.
Yeah.
They all come to the Big Ten next year. So what do we make out of this? Because all of a sudden this conference looks like a serious juggernaut with obviously those 3 all lose their quarterback after this year, and it's going to be UCLA, the only one of the 4 bringing their quarterback back in freshman 5-star Dante Moore. So that's really intriguing to me because all 4 of these teams probably ranked in the top 15 to 20 to enter next season.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it from a top level, it's going to be insane. I mean, it's just going to be a whole new landscape in college football in general, though, with the SEC's expanding with Oklahoma and Texas going down there, so that conference becomes a lot more challenging as well. I think the Big Ten probably clears just because of what we already have at bringing in these 4 teams that are all probably top 25 teams going into the season. I put UCLA in there too with Dante Moore coming back. Pretty impressive. And obviously it was a 5-star recruit. And Chip Kelly, that's a coach that has definitely been through a lot and is very experienced in college football. So yeah, it's going to be a really, really interesting landscape. But also you got to look at it. Whereas if you go 10-2, you're probably still making the playoffs because we're going to have that expansion next year going out to 12 teams making it.
Yeah, that's gonna be exciting. I know they have to redo the schedule again because Oregon and USC. I know USC was supposed to come to Penn State next year. I don't know if that's still the case, but I was looking forward to that. So it'll be a lot. Yeah.
Speaking of that schedule thing, how does it feel to have no protected rivalries? At least as of right now. I know that might change with the 2 newbies coming in.
Yeah, I know. When I went on the Ohio pod, we talked about this actually. I was surprised Michigan State actually because of the Land-Grant Trophy.
Yeah, no, that was one I kind of expected, but
that surprised me. Michigan. I thought they'd maybe put Maryland or Rutgers on there just because of the regionality thing.
Yes, yeah.
Ohio State, I wasn't sure because I knew that obviously Michigan was going to be one of them, and then they'd probably give them I don't think they wanted to give anyone any of the big boys two really hard protected rivals. I think they wanted to space that out, keep the good teams in a competitive spot. Unfortunately, like a team like Indiana or someone might get screwed by that, where they have to face two of the big schools. But I was surprised Michigan State, honestly, there's not like a lot of background to that outside of the fact that they do play usually the last week of the season, which is considered rivalry week, and they have a trophy. So that was the one that actually surprised me, even though like it's not a hyped up rival or anything. It just kind of is one by default in a way. So that was the one that actually surprised me.
Yeah, I think that would have made sense too. Just also historically, kind of looking at how the East has shaken out, like you two are kind of typically duking it out for like that third or second spot. So I think it's a rivalry. It's got the trophy. So yeah, that kind of did surprise me too to not have that one be protected. But maybe they shake things up and that ends up being a thing with Oregon and Washington coming in.
Yeah, I think eventually if it expanded to like Notre Dame joining, I think them and Notre Dame would maybe be one. I know Michigan would also be in that conversation. Because they used to play a lot when they were both independents, like back in the 70s and 80s. So I could see that maybe being one if Notre Dame was to join. Obviously, not sure if that's going to happen anytime soon, but
yeah, no, Notre Dame's definitely just I can't see them joining a conference, but it gets to a point where like you kind of have to when the conferences are this big. Being independent isn't really going to do anything for you anymore.
Right. Yeah, especially the rumors of Clemson maybe coming to the Big Ten too. I saw. So yeah, I think I don't know what you think. I think maybe not right away, but 10 years from now, it might be two like 20 to 30 team conferences, and it's kind of like the NFL on steroids, where maybe you play playoffs through your own conference, and then the two winners would meet in like a Super Bowl type game. Like I kind of see that. I don't want to make like a Civil War reference, but it really looks like it would be lined up as like the North versus the South, the way the conferences are shaping up. But I could see that eventually kind of being the outcome here.
Yeah, the way it's trending, that's really what it seems like. Like the Big 12 is kind of losing all its firepower with Oklahoma and Texas going out and bringing in like a bunch of lesser teams like Cincinnati, BYU, all those guys coming over this year. So yeah, the Big 12 is kind of lowering itself. And then the ACC, if all those rumors with like UNC and Clemson, Florida State potentially bouncing for the Big Ten or SEC, that kind of disbands the football credibility of that conference as well. And then the Pac-12 has already crumbled. So that's really the way it's trending, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it kind of shape out like that.
Yeah, and I will say, I think eventually football is going to have to break off from the rest of the sports in terms of conference affiliation, because it's just not sustainable for the other sports really to do what the football has to do.
No, it's not. Like, just think about like, a USC track team taking a trip to Rutgers all the way across the country on like a Tuesday night. Like, what's the point,
Yeah, especially because those sports, don't really make money. They kind of feed off of football and basketball at some schools. So, it's more of a hassle for the school, because that is obviously a lot more expensive to charter from LA to New York than LA to Oregon. So,
oh yeah. And also just looking at college football historically, we've kind of seen the layout of it shift over time. So, well, this may be the way it's trending right now. We could always see it. Maybe people aren't happy with it. Maybe it's affecting the other sports, and it kind of starts to dissolve itself back into what it was, with maybe some teams just going back to smaller conferences. So it'll be really interesting to see how the sport starts to evolve, starting with these mega conferences.
Definitely. Well, Brant, I'm done. I got all my questions answered. Thank you. So let's tell everyone about Big Banter, what we're working with right now, and what you have planned for the future.
Yeah. So for those of you who are not following Big Banter on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, make sure you go ahead and do that real quick. We're just at Big Banter Sports on all of those platforms. But essentially what our goal is when you look at, like a Barstool Sports, to be kind of the Big Ten version of that. So we've got a podcast representing each of the Big Ten teams right now, one for football and one for basketball. We're working on kind of finalizing that basketball roster with the season right around the corner, but definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. Penn State basketball pod coming soon, so be ready for that.
Yes.
And we also have a website up, so lots of cool content going up there in the form of blog posts, and you can kind of just check out all our different partner shows through that as well. That's at bigbannersports.com. Go and check it out.
All right. Well, thanks to Brant for coming on. If you're looking for the Penn State content, I guess we'll be back next week to talk about UMass of all teams, which this late in the season this is the latest in a season Penn State has played a non-conference game, actually, since they played UMass back in, I think that was 2013. So obviously UMass being an independent, you play them a little later sometimes. So a little change up for Penn State from a schedule standpoint, but I'll be back with the guys next week to talk about that one. So we'll see you then.